I want to thank you, Jen, for inviting me. Even more so, I want to thank you for the tremendous service that you provide to the denomination by the group that gathers here every month and by your tapes that go all over the world, I suppose. I think what you are doing here, what Spectrum does, what Adventist Today does, is help us to, as a denomination, do what is deep in our tradition, continue the idea of present truth, of progressive revelation. And my hat's off to you for, how many years have you been doing this now? I'm sorry to have to begin with an apology, and that apology is that I don't have my laptop in front of me. That's because yesterday it had the PowerPoint presentation that I'm going to give you, and today it doesn't have it. And so I've got the PowerPoint presentation to have to hear it from my mouth. It's not good, but it's better than my getting in my car and driving home. I think that I should first of all tell you where I am coming from on this important topic, where I'm ideologically, so that you can appreciate it, negatively or positively. You can put through what I say through a filter, and you can interpret it more appropriately. The idea of physician-assisted suicide is not just a left coast idea, but it is an idea that is in no less an esteemed assembly than the upper house of the British Parliament. A physician-assisted suicide bill received its first reading with the words, "My lords, I beg an adult who has capacity and is suffering unbearably as a result of a terminal illness to receive medical assistance to die his own considered and persistent." 6 days ago, that bill was defeated. I believe it was 148 to 100 by the Lords in Great Britain. Is this going to work okay, Jim? I can speak through this if you want. I want to mention how I will approach this topic now. First, I will give you some information on physician-assisted suicide because I'm convinced that having good data is the first step in assessing a particular situation. That's what I've been teaching my students for years. You can't arrive at a good ethical conclusion if you don't have a good sense of what the phenomenon is that you're talking about. So I want to give you some information to begin with. And then secondly, I will talk with you conceptually about what I see as the pros and the cons of physician-assisted suicide. And perhaps surprising to some of you is that I will be addressing this from a particularly Seventh-day Adventist position. The first slide that I would have showed you delineates the Assembly Bill 651 that is now before the California Senate. And its provisions are similar to the Death with Dignity Act upon which it is modeled from Oregon. 2 physicians must agree on the diagnosis of terminal illness. Both physicians must agree on the patient's competence. Both physicians and the pharmacist must make detailed reports to the state. The attending physician discusses alternatives such as hospice care, comfort care, pain control with the patient. Attending physician refers to the patient to counseling if that seems to be indicated. The patient makes 2 oral requests for physician-assisted suicide and then 1 written request. And there's a mandatory 15 days between when the written request is made and when the prescription for medication looks like I'm not the only one who has technology problems, Joe. The second point I would make is that polls here in the United States and as recently as earlier this year here in California show that between 65 and 70% of adults who are asked whether they would favor physician-assisted suicide say yes. For instance, here is one question. Do terminally ill patients have the right to ask for and get life-ending medication? 70% said yes. 22% said no. 8% were undecided. Those agreeing, 77% were Democrats, 65% Independents, 64% were Republicans. When they were asked, do you favor this option if you yourself were terminally ill? 64% of Roman Catholics said yes, and 58% of Protestants. Given where the Catholic Church is on this issue, it's rather surprising that 6% more of Roman Catholics than Protestants would say something like that. Oregon's when it was enacted back in the late 90s that people might come to avail themselves of this service. I believe in the first year there were something like 12 people who died with assistance. Between 1998 and the year 2004, for which we have statistics, 208 people total have died in that manner. And it's interesting the sort of profile of those individuals. For instance, they are younger than the average person who dies. They have more education. No less than 8 times the number of college graduates in that population as in the larger population of those that died. They usually die at home. In 2004, all but one of the individuals, some 30, died at home. It's not like everybody in Oregon is availing themselves of this, as you can see from what I have said. It's basically 1 out of 1,000 individuals choose this way to die. The low year was in 1998. There were 16 actually that year. The high year was in 2003. There were 42. And interestingly, just about the same number of females and males avail themselves of physician-assisted suicide. Why do participants use it? Many times I think that we have in mind that it's because of intractable pain that people want to have this as a way of exiting this life. But actually, it's only 22% who state that they would use this because of inadequate pain. No less than 92% say it's because of decreased ability to participate in activities that make life enjoyable. Close to that, 87% said it's loss of autonomy. 78% said it's loss of dignity. So that you can see it's more personal social reasons as opposed to pain that can't be alleviated that causes individuals to want to cease their lives. This comes home to me in that just the other day, my wife and I were talking to the woman in Claremont who served as basically the person who ran the church when I was pastor up until 1980 when I went to Loma Linda. And she is 95, I believe, and she is a person who has been a take-charge individual her whole life. I mean, I appreciated it when she took charge of the church and helped to run the church. Before that, before she had retired, she she was the institutional purchaser for a large state hospital in L.A. County. And she's that way now. I was telling the pharmacist, see here, that she doesn't like taking the pills that somebody else is telling her she needs to take. She wants to be in charge. And now she wants to die because she's got all kinds of physical ailments. And she's lived a good life. And she's ready to go. And she doesn't like the prospects of people hauling her into the hospital when she might be able to die and then propping her up so that she'll keep on going a little bit longer. If it was socially acceptable for her to do this, physician-assisted suicide, she might avail herself of it. But it really isn't an option for her, knowing her, because it's not within that which is appropriate. Should it be? Well, I'm arguing that it ought to be. Would she use it? Probably not. I mean, in Oregon, where you can use it, 1 out of 1,000 people do it. So the vast majority of us aren't. But it makes some people feel more comfortable if they know that that's an option, as opposed to knowing that they're going to have to keep a stiff upper lip and continue to live this life regardless of how they may have loss of dignity and basic functioning and pain. But usually that can be taken care of, although in certain circumstances it cannot be. Something about the idea of hospice care. I have a colleague at Loma Linda who says, no, I'm not for physician-assisted suicide. I want to go the hospice route. But need it be one or the other? For instance, in Oregon, studies show that individuals who have engaged in physician-assisted suicide, 86% of those are also enrolled in hospice. And end-of-life care in Oregon is now known as being the best in the country. Since the citizens approved the Death with Dignity Act in 1994, there has been an increase in the number of referrals to hospice care that physicians have made. Physicians have an improved knowledge of the psychological diseases that are related to end-of-life situations. There has been an enhanced knowledge of pain medication by physicians because of this measure. One study shows that 95% of hospice nurses and social workers favor hospice policies that would allow a patient to choose physician-assisted suicide while in hospice and continue that hospice care to the very end. Just a word on the recent history of physician-assisted suicide. Some of you will remember that back in 1991, 15 years ago now, Washington State had a referendum on physician-assisted suicide and defeated it 52% to 48%. The next year in California, a similar initiative was defeated 54 to 46%. And the advocates, the opponents of physician-assisted suicide, outspending the advocates 13 to 1. In Oregon in 1994, it was passed an initiative 51% to 49%. And you may remember that some of those who opposed it adamantly, they said, we want to have a revote. And so it was voted on again 3 years later. This was after Washington got involved and was threatening to undo this. And just, it seems to some of us, that to show the feds that Oregonians knew what they were doing, they went back to the polls and affirmed their earlier passage of the appropriateness of physician-assisted suicide, 60% to 40%. And between 2001 to January of this year, the current administration in Washington has been in litigation over the state's right to be able to do that. And then you may recall the headlines back 5 months ago now, in which the Supreme Court voted 6-3 that Oregon was in its right in doing what it was doing. Is this because it's a liberal Supreme Court? Well, not too many people would accuse the Supreme Court of being that liberal. In fact, the noted columnist George Will in Newsweek, a brilliant conservative writer, and a great writer. He said that actually that decision, which he supported, is a conservative decision. Can you see how that might work out? Because conservatives believe in letting the lowest level of government have jurisdiction rather than things be superimposed from on top. And because Oregonians decided this on their own, that was a conservative opinion of the Supreme Court rather than some would see it as a liberal opinion. Just some other information regarding the history of this. In Hawaii, in the year 2004, the physician-assisted suicide bill was voted down by the legislature. In Vermont, for the last 2 years, it's been hotly debated. And it was just a few days ago that the bill did not get out of a committee having to do with social services because the committee was split 5-5, and the 11th member of the committee was absent, and so it couldn't go on to their assembly. In California, there is a bill, AB 651, that I referred to, that is still in the Judiciary Committee of the Senate. And it's anticipated that that will go on to the full legislature in Sacramento and be voted on by the end of this session in early fall. If you want to get more information on that, go to the website, California Catholic Conference e-newsletter, because they are the ones who spent the big bucks to defeat it in California in '92, and you will read there, as I did just this morning, that they are having members visit legislators in their offices in Sacramento and in Catholic churches across the country, probably right up here. You can get postcards to send out. They are organized in opposing this, and more on the Catholic position in a moment. In Great Britain, the House of Lords, I've already referred to that. They have been debating and recently defeated a bill called Assisted Dying for the Terminally Ill. What's going on outside of Great Britain and the United States? Going over to the continent, in Holland, physician-assisted suicide and euthanasia. And that's going beyond assisting another who takes his or her own life to the individual who is aiding actually taking that last step. Dr. Kevorkian, who's in jail in Michigan as we speak, he, up until the last patient that he saw, he was engaged in physician-assisted suicide, but then he stepped over the line and actively took the life of someone who wanted it. It's a voluntary act of euthanasia, and even then, the authorities wouldn't arrest him. And he said, if you're not going to arrest me, I'm going to give the tape of what I have done, videotaped it, to 60 Minutes. 60 Minutes took it. Some of you probably saw it. It was shown one Sunday night, as I recall. And after that, the authorities couldn't let that go unanswered, and he was arrested, and he's now in jail. In Belgium, euthanasia was authorized in 2002. In Switzerland, assisted suicide is no crime if the assistant is not acting from self-interest, is doing it out of mercy. What about medical associations? The American Medical Association, as many of you know, is opposed. It has always been opposed and remains opposed to all forms of assisted dying. However, in Great Britain, the Royal College of Physicians and General Practitioners does support physician-assisted suicide. And then just last June, the esteemed British Medical Association, the primary physician association in Britain, dropped its opposition to physician-assisted suicide. The Swiss Academy of Medical Sciences recently dropped its opposition to physician-assisted suicide, but stressed the need for physicians to follow strict guidelines. Now, what about Adventism and physician-assisted suicide, euthanasia? I wish that I had my PowerPoint. I would be able to show you this and you could study it more carefully, but let me just read it to you. This comes from the 1994 guidelines of the General Conference. While Christian love may lead to the withdrawing or the withholding of medical interventions that only increase suffering or prolong dying, Seventh-day Adventists do not practice mercy killing or assist in suicide. They are opposed to active euthanasia, the intentional taking of the life of a suffering or dying person. So the Adventist Church is very clear. Active euthanasia, like what got Kevorkian in the slammer, no. And those who would help another patient to die, such as can be done in Oregon, they are opposed to that as well. The statement cites three biblical passages, Exodus 20:13, the commandment, thou shalt not murder, and a couple of other passages, do not slay the innocent and the righteous, whoever sheds the blood of man, by man shall his blood be shed, also from Exodus and then from Genesis, as support for that position. Maybe when we have discussion, we can talk about whether those passages are appropriate or not. Now, you might wonder, what about the large Adventist hospital in Portland Adventist? What do they do? There is an 11-year-old policy at Portland Adventist which reads as follows: assisted suicide in care for the dying. It charts a middle course. This is a quote. The hospital is opposed to assisting the suicide of terminally ill patients in its facilities. But the Adventist Health Northwest hospitals, although they may not admit patients for the purpose of assisted suicide, if they find that one of their patients who is already in the hospital wants to use that option, the hospital will set up a special committee to decide on each case individually. I've talked to the official at the hospital, and he says that there has never been anyone who has asked for this committee to be set up so that they could have that service in the hospital. But he told me that they have had special programs for the nurses and others who do outpatient service, and they are expected to aid a physician in physician-assisted suicide on an outpatient basis as the patient may desire, because they see that their care is for the patient and they don't see themselves as determining such important decisions for their patients. What should one make of this data? The church has spoken on this, but these are guidelines, and guidelines are not church dogma, and even the hospitals are encouraged to make up their own policies on questions like abortion, which also has guidelines, and positions such as physician-assisted suicide. That's a guideline, but you can see the church is clearly against that. I suggest that the answers that we as individuals have come from something that is deep within us, and hopefully something that is very thoughtful. I think that often when we do have new moral situations that we confront, often we look deep within our souls and follow intuitions that we have as to the rightness or the wrongness of those. And those intuitions come from what we learned perhaps when we were children coming up, what we absorbed as much as what we thought through. I think that Justice Scalia was insightful when he wrote in his dissent last January in Gonzales versus Oregon, when the Supreme Court voted 6-3, that Oregon's right to engage in physician-assisted suicide as a policy was appropriate. Gonzales said that one's choice about this topic is a, quote, naked value judgment. I think he's absolutely right. And we do vary on those things. I suggest to you that there are two primary paradigms for how we view human life. And here, if I had my slides up there, I would have the principle of human life on the one hand, the principle of human life. And on the other, I would have the notion of the capacity for humane living. The principle of human life, I suggest, is rather abstract, and it's firm. It's a principle that human life, all human life, be it minuscule from the single cell that we all began as to the most mentally incapacitated senile patient you can imagine. It's human life, and it has the highest value that one can give it, such as your and my life. Whereas the other concept, the capacity for humane living, is concrete, and it's more dynamic. What's humane living for one may not be humane living for another. And it is a focus not so much on some abstract principle as it is a capacity, what one has in terms of the ability to have a humane life. I think that the principle of human life is best exemplified by our friends, the Roman Catholics. The Vatican, for instance, had a document several years ago called Respect for Human Life, and the document speaks of embryonic human life from the single-celled conceptus on as a, quote, person, a person possessing identical value as adult humans. Pope John Paul II, in one of his last statements, he was speaking to a group of healthcare workers back in 2004. He said, and this was in light of the Terry Schiavo case, he said, the evaluation, and here again, I apologize for something as difficult as this syntax is to have to read it to you, but if you listen carefully, you'll get it. The evaluation of probabilities founded on waning hopes of recovery when the vegetative state is prolonged beyond a year. And that becomes a persistent vegetative state, not just a permanent. The persistent turns into a permanent vegetative state beyond a year. So he's talking about a person who is in that condition, like Terry Schiavo was. What do you do about that? He says when the evaluation suggests that it's a permanent vegetative state, you cannot ethically justify the cessation of minimal care, including nutrition and hydration. So that suggests to me that first principle, the principle of human life. But on the other hand, I think that our denomination, the Seventh-day Adventist Church, is a good exemplification of the capacity for humane living. I think back to my formative years in Adventist schools, and I don't know if you were made to memorize a passage from the book Education, page 17, but I was. What is it that's so important about human beings from an Adventist point of view? We are created in the what? The image of God, absolutely. Every human being created in the image of God is endowed with a power akin to that of the Creator. Individuality. The power to, think and to do. If there's any clearer exemplification of capacity for humane living, I can't think of what it would be. It's not some dry, abstract principle that is devoid from what's most precious about us. And so this is what makes me think that our denomination is one that is quite significant in articulating humane living as a capacity. The church's, is this just my idea? Let me give you a concrete example of this. The church's position on abortion highlights personal freedom. There is a one-page document which I have here, and you can get it off the internet if you don't have it. That's where I got it this morning. Guidelines on abortion. This is all there is to it. A world-based committee back in 1992, or earlier than that, because it was ratified by the church at an annual council meeting in 1992, came up with this. One of my colleagues had a lot to do with the first draft. And no less than 6 times in this short document do you have references to such things as personal freedom, individual conscience, those sort of notions. Jerry was talking earlier to a little group that met with him between church and this service about the fact that this denomination, Adventism, is one of 4 uniquely American churches. Mormons are another example, Christian Scientists, Jehovah's Witnesses. But we as Adventists don't just happen to be emphasizing personal freedom. It's also part of the fact that we are Americans. This is an American denomination, and you read what Ellen White said about the importance of the Constitution in the book, The Great Controversy. You find a good example of this emphasis on personal freedom in her writings. So the fact that we are emphasizing this is not idiosyncratic when it comes to my contention that we ought to use that in thinking about physician-assisted suicide. In this document, for instance, on abortion, there is the line, and this document is not a pro-choice document as such. There are sentences that can be taken as pro-life, such as prenatal human life is the magnificent gift of God, etc. But if you would study this, as I have, I think you would agree with me that it tilts toward a pro-choice position. One sentence, for instance, toward the end is, any attempts to coerce women either to remain pregnant or to terminate pregnancy should be rejected as infringements of personal freedom. I suggest that this emphasis should also be applied to the also controversial issue of physician-assisted suicide. And so we might have what I think would be a more appropriate statement than we do have, in which we would say something like, any attempts to coerce terminally ill individuals to either engage in physician-assisted suicide or not engage in physician-assisted suicide should be rejected as infringements of personal freedom. I can't see a reasoned moral case for it applying to one, but not to the other. Something that has long been a part of my thinking since I've studied theology as an Adventist is what's often referred to as the Wesleyan quadrilateral. If I had something before you, I would have a diagram that had 4 words in 4 corners with arrows pointing between all 4 words and crisscrossing, pointing. They are all mutually correcting and supportive. And those concepts are the Bible, that would be up in the upper left corner, tradition, human experience or good data, and then reason. This isn't something that John Wesley preached so much, as scholars who have studied his writings see that emerges from his rich thought. He started off with the Bible. We've got to get our basic trajectory on what life is about somewhere, and we Christians believe that the Bible is the Word of God, but we don't worship it as fundamentalists, thinking that it tells us everything that's needed. We recognize that there are other people who've thought about the Christian life and how to live it beyond ourselves. Therefore, tradition's important. How have people over the last 2,000 years thought about like themes? So the Bible and tradition. But it's not just that. What about our current human experience? What's working? What's not? New technology, new ideas. How do we take those into account? So what's happening today? We don't have Bible colleges as such in Adventism, at least not many of them. They're mostly liberal arts colleges because we think that there is value in studying what other people have written and thought, what we get out of the science laboratories. So we don't just go and find it all in the Bible. So human experience is important. And then fourthly is reason. These higher powers of the mind that God has given us, God expects us to use those in putting together Bible, tradition, human experience in a way that makes sense. And I suggest that this Wesleyan quadrilateral is a good way for us to go in terms of approaching topics such as we're talking about today. In terms of data regarding this particular topic, I would remind you that when it comes to death in the modern medical center, it's an exception for an individual to die in the middle of the night without anybody having an idea that death was imminent or why it happened. In fact, quite the contrary. Studies in current medical literature show that 75 to 80% of the deaths that take place here in the UCSD Medical Center, Loma Linda's Medical Center, take place as a conscious decision that the life should not continue. We call it passive euthanasia. We say, family says Aunt Sally's not coming back around. She's semi-comatose. You're saying that she's never going to get back to herself. She's 95 years old. She didn't want to live this way. Is it time to disconnect the ventilator? Talk about it? Yes. The ventilator's disconnected. What happens? She dies. Or the IV feedings, TPN, disconnected for similar reasons. Like I say, 3 out of 4 people who die today die in that manner. And we think that is an appropriate way to go, given how technology can keep people going on and on if we choose to use it in that way. Let me share with you how my own mind has changed on this topic. I participated in a conference at Claremont School of Theology back in 1990. My colleague Dave Larson and I both gave papers at that conference. The most well-known theologian at Claremont when I went there is John Cobb, a process theologian. He is now retired, still there in Claremont. He argued, I recall, in favor of physician-assisted suicide. And I still remember that, among other arguments, he cited the fact that there would come a place where, when he might be dying, terminally ill, and his dignity was gone, the candle wasn't worth the flame, that he thought that he should have the option of dying before his natural end. And part of his reasoning was family resources. Because we don't have a lot of money, and to have those resources going for my dwindling life rather than going to the family is something that I don't think is right. I gave a paper opposing physician-assisted suicide. And my basic argument was that, yes, autonomy is important and individual choice is something that is in our Christian Western tradition, but I argued that society, all things considered, would be worse off. That there would be individuals who were perhaps teenagers who were conflicted about their lives, and if they, in a period of depression because of a jilted boyfriend or girlfriend relationship, they wanted to take their lives, if they knew that there were people in the hospital who might help you take your life as well as save you from disease, that might be further confusing, and it could be a bad societal policy. My mind has changed as I have looked at further human experience and as I have further reflected theologically on. I mentioned that in 1992, this was a couple of years after that conference, in California we voted on Proposition 161, which was whether we were going to adopt a physician-assisted suicide initiative. I studied the issues as deeply as I wanted to, and teaching at our denomination's leading medical school there at Loma Linda, I thought that it was important for me as an ethicist to really plumb this issue so that I could more intelligently talk about this initiative professionally and also personally vote. And so in my research, I read the Medical Association journal, was the Journal of Western Medicine, in which I read a piece that was written by a colleague in bioethics, Albert Johnson, a former Jesuit. And I had told, teaching at the time, he told of going back east and explaining why Washington had defeated a similar initiative in 91. He came back to Washington State, and he was attending